Seems like my camera decided to stop working at just the right time. All right, here we go. Hey everyone, I'm Corey. I work at Epic, and I'm mainly focused on New South Wales on the integration team for Epic, and part of our technical services division. But today I'm just going to be talking a little bit about the diagnostic report. What I'll start off with is I'll start off with some just basic context about what it is. I'll differentiate it a little bit with the document reference because I know we've had quite a few information sessions around document reference, just differentiating the use case here for this versus document reference. And then I'll start to go into some of the things that we're thinking for our proposal. There are a lot of tough questions, I think, to be answered as a part of diagnostic report. And I think we can dive really deep into whichever of those folks feel like they want to get into on this. But I'm going to just start off with some context first. So first, we have a Menti poll. So if you wouldn't all mind joining the Menti, and Danielle, if you wouldn't mind taking the
Yep, I'll
lead
shift
on
over
this,
to my
please.
screen in just a bit. I'll leave that QR code there for a couple of seconds. Um, and then I will take over sharing. So let me click on that. Replace current share. Okay. So that should be working for people. So you should see this question. Hopefully that's coming up for people in the Menti. All right, I'm seeing some stuff come in. And I think I can also make the QR code for those people who are joining us now come up somehow. Hmm. Well, there's at menti.com, you can put that code in that's at the top there, the 24113220. All right, so how many people do we have on the line actually today? Ooh, we've got like 33 people. Who are joining. So, okay, so we've got responses from 18 people, and you should be able to select multiple choice. Let me know if you can't, but you should be able to. And this is just kind of forming some of the background of our conversations for going through the information around diagnostic report and fire, and how that is used. How do I bring up the slide? No, I can't find the QR thing again. Oh well. So again, if you've just joined, if you could go to menti.com and you could put in that code that's at the top there, the 2411, the 3220. All right, we'll just give it maybe 1 or 2 more seconds and then we'll go to the next question. But no, that's good to have see, I think, some of the spread of the information today. We've got a bunch of people around standards, analysts, we've got health informaticians, information modelers, we've got policy development, software developers. So it's good to have a spread, I think, in this kind of conversation. All right, I'm going to go to the next slide. So I guess a question around this on is this are you a regular of things that were TDGs, which are now called work groups? Um, do you attend the AUCDI calls? Have you been to an AU Core information session? I know that says last week's AU Core information session, and that's an oops on my part. I meant that to just be, have you been to an information session before? So sorry about that. Um, or is this the first time you're joining one of the calls? So it looks like we've had 19 people respond so far, and we've got 30 on the line, and I've just navigated away. No, I'm back. So we'll just give it a couple more seconds for people to respond. So it looks like we've got a couple of people who are new and welcome. It's always fantastic to have new people who are joining the conversations because we're only as, good and diverse the community that comes to the conversation. So it's always great to have new people, and welcome back to those who are regulars of our work group calls and the information sessions. So I'm just going to go to the next one. So how well do you know AU Core? Um, is this something that you're just starting with? Are you a fire starter? Are you someone who's familiar with fire but not really AU Core? Are you kind of actually familiar with AU Core? Or are you like, I'm implementing it. I know all about it. That's what's happening. Are you blazing the implementation on AU Core? And it's so exciting to see heaps of people blazing the implementation on AU Core. So for those people who've just joined us, if you could go to menti.com and you can put in the code 2411 3220. We've got a number of Menti things. Some of these are the welcome and introduction we're doing now. And then there's some more content questions later in the call. All right, I think I'll go to the next one. So how well do you know Diagnostic Report? Because that's what we're about to talk about today. The Fire Diagnostic Report resource, what's involved, how are we going to include it in AU Core? And I've admittedly stolen the words that actually came out of what was a meds info session, which is why it says like dose, not compute. Um, but I still thought that that was funny, so I've included it. Hmm. All right, so we've got some people who look like they're not very familiar with the fire resource in particular of Diagnostic Report. Some people who are coming to, who are getting some knowledge about it. Some people who are intermediate, and then a couple of people who've just overdosed on Diagnostic Report. Oh, now three. Love it. Okay, so here's, I think, the big question that will help shape the rest of this session. So, for those people who've joined who want to know about Diagnostic Report, which I think should be everybody who's joined, like, what are your use cases? Why do you care about Diagnostic Report? What are you using it for? So, a lot of this is, I mean, that's really not surprising. Looking at pathology, looking at diagnostic imaging, that's good. I think that's kind of what we were preparing for. So I'm pleased that some of the previous conversations that we've had in the community around what would be useful is really coming through but quite strongly. Um, I think there's also what is really interesting is that one around, I guess, drug and alcohol testing, which I think is a specific use case, but I mean, that's really quite common. Ooh, cancer register. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Um, and then seeing non-path and non-DI. Is the person who added that, would you be happy to comment for us? What is that use case for you?
Hi, Danielle, Dave McKillop here. Probably from the
Hello.
agency's point of view, where we'll be looking at all sorts of pathology, imaging, and other non-pathology and non-imaging content going up to the My Health record eventually. So that's where
So
we're.
is that what like I think the most common example that I often hear from people are things like sleep studies. Is that the kind of thing that
Yeah,
you think about? Okay.
yes, that sort of stuff. Yeah,
I think
And
genomics
maybe audiology?
genomics
yeah.
coming up on the screen as well, I think is a big one.
Mhm. Oh yeah, genomics. Yep. All right. I think the respondents have slowed down now. So I think we've got the last question from this kind of like introductory set on for those people on the line. Have you already implemented Fire Diagnostic Report? Are you thinking about in the future? Is this just not at this time? I realize we don't have a question here for people who aren't implementers, so apologies for those people who um, aren't an implementer.
You got 5 responses for yes, we do now. Six responses is already more than we had on the Confluence page. So I will be asking folks to, if you could after the session, go back to the Confluence page and talk about what you do support in the elements. It's really useful for informing what we're talking about for our proposal and the conversations we'll be having and voting as well. So I can link to that after.
Yeah, did you want to put that link in the chat, Corey?
Yeah, I'll pull it up right now.
Mhm. Okay, so yeah, we've got a definite amount of people who already do, and a higher proponent of people who are intending to. That doesn't surprise me. I think that's like, reading the room. That's kind of what I've been hearing. Um, and so I think I'm gonna stop sharing now and throw that back to you.
Sure thing. So I just posted the page I've been using to try to figure out what elements and terminology people are using right now. So if you responded and you do already support it, it would be really useful if you could go in there onto that page and respond to them. Something else that can be useful is if you can respond to it in a way where you're like, these are the concepts that I support on a result or like diagnostic type report exchange, even if it's in HL7v2 or another way of just like, hey, this is like the type of element that I support. If you just label it up at the top, I think that's also useful context for us. So even if you haven't specifically supported the FHIR resource, you could still respond to the Confluence page and give us that kind of context about the types of things you do support on a diagnostic report or result. All right, I'll start sharing again. So we're going to get into a little bit about AU Core Diagnostic Report. I'm going to start at a higher level. Happy to dig into things that specific areas that folks want to dig into. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of like very specific industry knowledge on this call. So there may be some things where folks on this call have a lot more knowledge than I do. So definitely pipe up and chime in. Would appreciate your context. So AU Core Diagnostic Report. So this profile is what we're proposing is a single consolidated profile derived from AU-based diagnostic report. And what needs to be done is we need to create the profile, derive it from the AU-based one, figure out the must supports, figure out the obligations, invariants, value set bindings, search parameters. Um, why are we doing this? I think is a good question of this is to support Australian diagnostic workflows. And especially with e-requesting, having the first release of e-requesting being out, we can start to support the other side of e-requesting, which is the result responses. Diagnostic Report has a good way of linking back to those service requests that you might see through e-requesting through like the based on element. This is a recommended part of the AU patient summary. And then there's other downstream cases that can really build on top of diagnostic report. I think we can have a more generic diagnostic report profile that we start to build a lot of other diagnostic report use cases on top of. But I think we need to start somewhere as well. So we'll want to balance that against like making sure we're immediately responding to some use cases and having something out there that we can build off of and put other things on there. So what is the impact? So we're proposing it to be a new profile in AU Core R3, and it references 3 of the observation subprofiles that are already in AU Core. So that's the pathology result, the diagnostic imaging result, and the diagnostic result observation. So this is a good way to group these. So you can have some of the atomic results, but it can also be a good way to represent a coded diagnostic report, a coded diagnostic report that just references a PDF or something human readable as well. So it supports both sides of those things. And why now? A lot of fire migration is going on in Australia in this space, and e-requesting R1 released is a big part of this as well. The results side counterpart would now be the priority now that we have the e-requesting portion of it. Um, and then it's also part of the recommended IPS composition. Um, any questions about this? I think this is just like a very basic introduction, and we'll dig into the details more.
I'd be interested to see from the people on the line, is there anyone on the line who is trying to actively work on like a V2 to fire migration? If you could, I don't know, I guess maybe put your hand up in Zoom if that's something that you're working on.
Can I speak for Angus? He's got an open source V2 to Fire transform. I'll put the link to it somewhere.
Yeah, Angus was one I talked to
Yep.
a bit about
I
this.
mean, I think the chat would work for the link. Vince, you're working on one? All right.
Sorry, if I could unmute. I'm looking in some sunshine here, which making my screen difficult to read. Yes, so I'm working on V2 to IPS and V2 to diagnostic using an AI to actually do those transforms. So I've demonstrated the V2 to IPS, I think at the last, no, the hackathon before last.
Okay. And then I think we've got Heath and then Talwinder.
Not sure if anyone on Many Records is here, but we're certainly thinking about it for the future. Trying to bring in through receiving the V2, having a middle layer or an exchange layer, and then having default APIs to bring those in using Fire. So that might be some time down the track, but that's certainly something that's been discussed.
And then, okay, then we got Talwinder, and then oh no, hang on. Maybe we could actually go to Neil. Sorry, Talwinder, because Neil is Medi Records. Did you want to comment on that?
It's just following on what he said. So currently we have sort of an legacy integration layer, which receives V2 messages and transforms it in that layer to a proprietary format, and then we expose it as Fire. And one of the challenges we had back then was which attachments we support, and we landed on based on standard recommendations on PDF, HTML, and doc. And we, at the time, we said we wouldn't support PIT format, which meant we had to go back to some of the labs which sent PIT to ask them to use one of them newer formats. Yeah, that's about it.
Interesting. And then, sorry, okay, so Talwinder and then Tim.
Daniel, our systems are the consumers for OIUs presently, where the results are coming, imaging and pathology results are being coming and stored, and we are expecting that to come in Fire in future, looking up how that mappings, the mapping will happen, or the documents will come, and if we have any business logic based on any fields that should be identified.
And then, so Tim?
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. From the agency's perspective, we have a middleware service there that's called HIPS, the Health Information Provider Service, and we, in that, convert HL7 V2, the ORU messages, pathology and radiology reports, and convert them to CDA. I think the agency will be looking at expanding that development to also support V2 to FHIR at some point. And so these would be, very great discussions for us to get across on how that would look in terms of a push.
Okay, thank you everyone for giving kind of like that update on those people who are on the line who are looking at an active kind of project that's moving between V2 to FHIR for diagnostic reporting. I'll hand back to Gory.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. Yeah, it's definitely really good context, I think, there's a lot of different use cases here. And I think that's probably what we'll get into when we start talking about this and start voting on it is like, what are we trying to fit into an initial release of diagnostic report and or is this the foundation to make sure that we can build all these other things based off of it? So I think there'll be some tension there that we'll have to talk through. I'm gonna skip past this one. I'm gonna get into some context here. Heath, feel free to chime in if there's anything you want to add in this section, but I wanted to do just like a quick differentiation between document reference and diagnostic report. The lines are definitely blurred between these two, and there are things that overlap between the two. But like if you have a PDF for a diagnostic report, it is definitely something that you could be discoverable through diagnostic document reference. But if you have atomic data, it's probably not something that would be able to be referenced through the document reference. But there's also additional things that the diagnostic report gives you, which is that structured data, and it also allows you to code these reports in a way that you would not be able to as easily with document reference using LOINC code, something like LOINC codes, or we can talk about the actual terminology that we want to use, but like those categories that are specific to diagnostic reports. So what is it? So he talked about it a lot, but it's really like the document reference is a way to index all digital health documents. So rather than a specific order report, carries a lot of that metadata, and there's not really any structured data within the document reference itself. And talked about some of the AU core use cases. Based on the session that I heard, I was more thinking of this as the hammer for a lot of different use cases for document exchange. Tells you what the document is and where to find it regardless of the type. Whereas diagnostic report, it can give you presented like PDF or something like that. But it is really much more based on when you have like a diagnostic is specific to a diagnostic finding, allows you to have those coded elements. It allows you to have the structured data within it, allows you to reference specific observations, elements within it. It allows you to group things like pathology results, a pathology test, and have the underlying observations under it. And it can be tied to a service request with based on. So it's more not exactly a scalpel because it's still a very broad thing, but definitely a little bit more specific than what document reference is trying to cover. And you can find the values and actual encoded interpretations from it as well. Are there any questions or things that people want to add on this?
I'll just do a quick one, probably. Because it's not really specific to diagnostic report, because we've got like an info session about document reference coming up in like an hour and a half, because that's being progressed into AU Core, and I think that does raise the what do we call it, resource type selection question, like which resource are you choosing to share information from? I think we need both of them. And then I think we're probably going to need something in AU Core that talks about that there's more than one way to do this, and how do you know whether or not a system is doing one or the other. So I think it's an additional kind of overhead that we can get into later, and it's maybe more the doc ref conversation. But I think it's a topic.
Yeah, and I did just want to bring it up. There's probably a better place to spend. If people want to talk about it here, they could, but there's probably a better place to spend time on it. I did include for US Core like the guidance about where it talks about document reference versus diagnostic report, and that you can use as a reference for yourself for now. Just included that link in the chat. All right, so what does this enable? So I think that there's a lot of things that it can enable, and we can talk about the ones that we want to focus on. I've hit on it a few times, the AUE requesting. So we're able to link to that service request based on. It allows the results side workflow. The AU patient summary, talked about it a bit. But this is part of the recommended piece for showing the problems and procedures, the procedures and the underlying results. Shared access to health record access. I think we see this a lot in the US for like Smart on Fire launches where a provider or a patient is able to pull in some of their diagnostic report results and be able to see a consolidated and coded review of those things. Regulatory and compliance uses. I think there's probably going to be a lot of use cases for this. I'm thinking things in my health record, maybe even if we're talking about use cases for NCSR or other like or if there's NPAC requirements that want to build on top of this. I think that there's a lot of different things that can be done in the regulatory space as long as we have a foundation to build off of. And then any future downstream profiles, I think the genomics is a big one that is very top of mind for me. I think there's more and more going on in that space. But if we wanted to build other profiles that are specific to imaging, specific to pathology, specific to other kind of structured reports, I think this would be a good profile to use to build off of it. All right. So talking about the profile scope and purpose. So what am I trying to what are we trying to achieve with this proposal? It really is that minimum set of expectations for the exchange of diagnostic reports. I think we'll probably see similar language in a lot of these profiles, but making sure that we have a way that we have the minimum amount of elements that we need to support the exchange of these things. And I think this one is for all diagnostics. So it's like, what do we need across pathology results and imaging results and cardiology, pulmonary, those other things. So for subjective care within the Australian context. So I want to pause here. Like, are there any concerns or questions or thoughts about the wording that I'm using here? Danielle.
Yes, me again. I think given what we talked about in the use cases, it does say such as pathology results or diagnostic imaging results, and then we've got the other stuff maybe around audiology and sleep studies. So I just think we might want to tweak that so that it's still so that those things are in scope.
What are you suggesting for the language? Saying like having a longer specific list or making it less specific to make it so that it inherently covers those use cases?
Honestly, I think we could just cheat and drop such as pathology results or diagnostic imaging reports, and we just go to diagnostic reports. I think that's the cheapest way to say this is inclusive of everything we consider diagnostic, and then there'll be like value sets and so forth that set out that inclusion.
So we just say so provides a minimum set of expectations for the exchange of diagnostic reports.
By providing metadata. Yeah. We
Okay.
just skip over that. Yeah, I think that's the cheapest way to do it.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I think it is a balance for me of like trying to get someone to understand what we're talking about here. But I think if we're having something that's making sure we're being inclusive, I think that's probably the better way to do it. Are there any concerns with that approach from the rest of the group? It seems like the requisite amount of silence, so I'll move on. And then the second point, I was talking about some of the use cases that I was thinking about and trying to fit them into here as well. So enabling the system to discover and exchange diagnostic reports. So I have the such as pathology results or diagnostic imaging reports. I think based on the feedback for the first section, we can just say diagnostic reports. And then talking about the use cases of they can be structured as linked observations or rendered as an attached document. So talking about the machine readable and the human readable report content, and enabling enabling them to be linked back to that service request. So I think those are the really important things that I saw as enabling as use cases. I don't know if there's anything folks think that's missing from here, or wording that needs to be changed. Yeah, I think for genomics is really interesting. I'm just looking at the chat. Genomics is really interesting to me because I'm definitely seeing it reported in PDF a lot, but I think that there's discrete genomics is starting to become more and more common. And and the standards need to evolve really quickly for discrete genomics, and it's something that's not really well supported and incredibly well supported in HL7 v2. There is like standards that support it for HL7 v2, but they're definitely newer, and I think just at the rate that genomics is progressing and changing, that there's a lot that could be done in the FHIR space to make sure that we're supporting the things like discrete genomics, discrete variants, and things like that. In a well-reported manner. So I think it's definitely PDFs, but I think I'm also in the back of my mind thinking about those discrete variants. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of use cases people are thinking about in the chat. So I think I'm getting more on board with Danielle's just say diagnostics and then we can provide examples, but at least talking about the scope and purpose, we don't necessarily need those inside the scope and purpose section. All right, start to get into some of the juicy stuff here. So we're gonna start to do a profile comparison. We have a proposal that we thought about, and there will be some tough questions within this proposal, but starting to go through the proposal and how this differentiates with some of the things that were done for AU base, AU preview, and also things that were done for US core and IPS. So we'll be comparing across all of those kind of spectrums. So this is what we're looking at generally for what are we talking about for must support elements. It's going to be a lot to ingest, and I think that there can be a lot of comments on this. If there's any specifically that folks want me to talk through, I am more than happy to. It might be a little bit easier once we get into the next slide where I'm differentiating it against AU preview and some of the other ones. But yeah, Danielle, if you've got something immediately.
Yeah, I think because I can't recall the mind, but maybe you can. I think a bunch of these cardinalities just come from the FHIR standard. So it's just how it works.
Yep.
Which ones out of these are the ones where we've made a change in Australia?
Yeah. A big one is identifier, performer is one. There's things that we talk about for like what we're doing for effective and issued that I think are similar in Australia that we're doing to other places. Yeah, sorry. But yeah,
Because they're all
identifier.
optional so far. Did we make anything mandatory in base that wasn't mandatory? Oh, okay, no, I see it there. Well, yeah, okay. So, oh, yeah, okay. So the preview 022 for core made mandatory, and you're suggesting that R3, we actually say that diagnostic report identifier is not mandatory. So that wouldn't be a change, but it was maybe one we talked about some time ago. Okay.
Yeah, so I think it's like when I was doing this comparison, to be fully transparent, I was struggling a little bit. There's a lot that's out there already. There is things in AU base for diagnostic report imaging, for diagnostic report pathology, all in AU base. And then on top of that, we have the preview one, and then yeah, so there's like three AU based ones. There's the preview one, and then there's obviously every other the like US core ones and the IPS ones out there. So there's a lot of different comparisons that I could be doing, and a lot of different ways that we could slice this. So I was trying to figure out what's the most useful for folks here, and what gives the correct context. But yeah, so it's like, are
I
we?
guess I have a couple of opinions on that. And I will say I see in a potential suggestion, and we absolutely should be discussing about that as community, around issued and effective, which have gone from mandatory to optional. I I think we have to have a time. We have to have some kind of time period related to a diagnostic report, or I'm not sure it's worth sharing.
I think that I call this out here about why I'm doing it. If you have something
Mm,
that's canceled, you don't really have an issued or effective date. Like, so that's what this is. This is a binding of saying like, yes, this
mm.
is required if it's actually in a reportable status. So if it's in partial, if it's in final, if it's in amended, if it's in corrected, like these will be required. But I'm just making it conditional. Like if it's canceled or like, so it was never actually like issued. It was never actually effective, then you wouldn't be required to have a date. So you can still be discoverable for something that was canceled that you didn't perform on that you don't have dates for. So I think that's the breakdown of what I was trying to do there of like, is it really issued if you canceled it? And this is similar to what we do for US core. And I think that model works well of like, are you including a date when you didn't actually do the test? So
So maybe in that case, it would be okay if we followed that, and I'm not sure I 100% agree, I'm coming around to it, but then maybe we would have an invariant that says that you need effective if your status is anything but cancelled or maybe entered in error.
yeah,
And we go, you must otherwise have a date. We could do
yeah,
that.
yeah. And that's very similar. That's what we do in US core. So like, and so there's like there's a long list of statuses, and there's like it's like all include like this is conditionally required for every single status except for like a few exceptions. Is basically what it is. But
Yeah, because I don't know, are other people thinking about the date thing, or is this just me getting really hung up on something?
There will be NPAC requirements around dates for reports, which should link into these elements. So issued is probably date reported, and effective could be collection date. I was looking at this the other day.
Can
yeah,
be.
Those kinds of things are mandatory on pathology reports.
how do you deal with it if it's like if something was canceled, like so it's never issued?
Well, if it's never reported, it's it shouldn't be a problem, should it?
Yeah, and that's what I mean is like that's what I'm saying with the conditionality here. It's like I 100% agree that these are should always be required if we're actually reporting something. If you're not actually if you're just saying like, hey, this was the report that like was based on something else, but we canceled it. It is like our report is now in this canceled status. It's like
Yeah, I think
uh
it'd be really useful to map these across to the current V2 required fields in the Australian standards.
yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that would
I
be
did
definitely useful
I
to
did do
send.
that effort. I don't have it on the slides because I was trying to figure out the breakdown between like is is this are we building the foundation or are we building something specific to pathology reporting? And I
Oh.
wasn't trying to build something specific
Uh,
to pathology.
yeah, I agree.
Mm.
Like it's yeah, it's half half, isn't it? But at the same time, these need to be minimum requirements of sharing something useful.
Mhm.
And while okay, I don't think we need to represent all of the impact requirements in a UCOR diagnostic report because it is much more abstract than that. I
Yeah,
think, yeah, I think we need to consider them and then talk about that foundation. Because I think a bunch of them will need to adopt in some form. And maybe it does come out conditional, like how you were talking about around for these statuses, we don't need this, but for all the others, we do.
and I have I'll link the proposal as well. I'll create a page similar to what Heath did afterwards, and I'll get really deep into like why this is conditional for these reasons. I was honestly trying to fit things on a slide, so which is yeah.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, but and he's talking about it in the chat, but yeah, 100% agree that it's the collection date. I think there's some chat about this on the Confluence page, but just the relevance for that of like if you collected one specimen, I'm just kind of doing a hand wavy example here, but like 5 days ago, and you collect another specimen the same day, and you tested both of them or today, and then you tested both of them today. It's like you want to be able to report on like why is this result totally different than this one for results trending purposes? Is the treatment improving their prognosis? Things like that. And then the issue date is like, hey, when did we actually send this out? Yeah, identifier is an interesting one as well. And I think performer will be another one that um, I think that honestly, I'm open to making it mandatory if folks feel very strongly about it. I think when I was thinking about it from the principles of like what is minimum required, what is minimally required to be able to exchange these successfully, it wasn't something that was always minimally required, and it's worked fairly well in the US for not having this be like a mandatory element, but having it be a must support, like must support if you have it. But I'm happy to be told that like this is absolutely necessary to be mandatory for that one. That one I don't really feel that strongly about.
Sorry, I was just typing something in the chat. I really like the idea of having identifier mandatory, but I don't know how feasible that is. I am also realizing the whole like cancelled and it doesn't really have an identifier thing, and maybe that's conditional. But I think like mapping all of this stuff and having like lab number and so forth is really, really important. So I'm fairly attached to having identifier like time be as strong as we think we could feasibly make it at an AU core level.
I think my support makes sense, but I don't know that we can mandate it. Um, there's an element of, I mean, if it's coming from the source, they're likely to have a report identifier. But if you're sort of making it up, like many records that Neil was saying that we actually use diagnostic report for outbound after we've already done some internal processing from V2 into proprietary, we kind of lose that because we don't care about the report from the lab perspective. And what's really important from a requester system that's getting these reports is actually the original request, so they can actually tie it back to the request. And this isn't the place to put the request identifier. It's actually the request associated with this um, report. Well, that's my opinion anyway.
True, based on, and maybe based on with
Mm.
a link to identifier is where you would link that. You could, however, do so. It's come through in V2, it's come through in CDA, and it's also supported in Fire. There's a perspective that you can link both your request and reporting identifiers just in identifier, in the observation, in the diagnostic report, in the service request, because that allows you to like group different resources together. We've not really talked about that paradigm, but it is a recognized one.
No, I wouldn't be against it. It would be a nice shortcut to what I was saying that where it probably really belongs is on the based on identifier, but I'm not seeing based on this list. Maybe it's on another page, but
Yeah, this is just the must supports.
uh,
Um,
so you're not must supporting a request based on?
no. Where's it? I thought I had it on this page. All right, let me.
No, I don't want to
Yeah,
interrupt your flow. We can come to that later.
yeah. Brett.
Can I jump in? Corey? Yeah, I'm I think there's a line to be drawn for AU core because like we if we wander off into workflow management, which is including linking to requests, I think we're kind of trying to solve the whole thing.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure we're the right group to do that as well because there's other considerations but I kind of think we need to draw a line somewhere because the way I was coming at it was more like I need a findable clinical artifact that I can read the report and I want to know who's involved and when it happened. It's like the primary kind of clinical use. Um, and there's probably a line somewhere around interpretations and stuff as well, maybe. But if you go and try and solve the whole workflow management problem, I think we need to involve the requesting group because they are on top of that too. And we would have to actually work through all of the workflow requirements. And I think that's actually really hard. But I think this is super important in terms of things to share. And yeah, because we're not trying to implement workflow. We need to share the clinical information primarily. Key, safe clinical information sharing. I think is probably what we want to aim for.
But there's an element of like a distinction between mandatory and then must support. And if you know something, so it would be something like an identifier. If you know an identifier, it would be nice to have that identifier. It might be useful, similar with a date and similar with a request for the based on, for example. So I'm not.
I'm
I have
I'm
no
not stopping
problems
you,
with.
but why you're requiring it? Like this
I'm
this is
not
the thing.
requiring
Yeah,
it. That's my point.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
saying
yeah. Cool,
if you got one, give it. But if you don't have one, then you don't have to have it. And that's the distinction between 0 to 1 must support and 1 to 1 must support.
cool. But I think too, well, if we're talking about these kinds of elements, we'll have to link in and do some joint stuff with their requesting and how their definitions are playing out. Is
Yeah.
what I'm saying as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I definitely think that like this is a really major question here of like I think diagnostic report is the one that we're talking about here is the foundation for a lot of different use cases that there's like a lot of pathology specific stuff and then there's like radiology specific stuff and then there's things that are just like e-requesting specific stuff and what I landed on when I was doing this was trying to build the foundation for like this is the minimum requirements for just supporting this and being able to exchange this element, not necessarily supporting any of those specific use cases. And I think that like what I was trying to do is like if we need something that's built on top of this, where you're saying, yes, we have pathology specific requirements, that can still be done. I was just trying to make sure that we had something and we started somewhere. And I'm happy to get feedback on that of like, hey, maybe we need this and we need pathology and we need diagnostic imaging to really make this successful and split out those conversations. But I also think we need to start somewhere. So sorry, Daniel, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I think I was really just going to echo exactly what you said. This doesn't solve like lab reporting. It does not solve imaging reporting. It doesn't solve any of those in specific. This is a minimum kind of like common profile on how we can exchange diagnostic reports if your system has them. And we absolutely need the specific specifications to address the workflow and like actually do the NPAC requirements and fire in a bunch of things. Core's not going to do that. Um, and so there's the abstract nature to what we're talking about of these are the things that we think just go across everything. They're like the minimum that systems should be supporting, regardless of whether you're path or imaging or like audiology. These are the kinds of things that should be in place and how we can like get data from you. And then to solve the specific workflows, we really do need the more detailed specifications.
Is there anything else specific people want to get into on that conversation? If not, there's just 5 minutes left, so I kind of want to wrap up and just kind of think about or talk about where I think some of the major tough questions are and things that we'll have to answer as we get into actually talking about this and voting on things next week. Requisite amount of silence. I'll move us forward. I'll share the slide deck. I have profile comparisons with other IGs. I don't want to get too much into it. But here are some of the really tough topics that I think that where we're going to get into. Um, One or multiple profiles. I think we've already talked about this a bit. And I think this is going to be a major question. And it's like, I think this is like our starting point. And if we need to split out other specific profiles, that's what we'll do. And that was the principle I was thinking about in my mind. If we need to create other profiles, I think that's something that can be done. DiagnosticReport.code. This one was hard for me to make a decision on exactly what we should do. I ended on Loink and for the Loink as preferred. And the reasons for that are that like when I'm thinking about what is a reportable code, what do we use in IPS, what do we have in US core, and what are like the SPIA requirements for these? I'm thinking like reportable codes is normally a link code, and I don't think that, but I do know that for Ransker, I don't know exactly how to pronounce it, but the radiology codes are all, I think in Australia, are all SNOMEDs at this point, and they're mapped to SNOMEDs. And I more think of that as like the orderable side for the orderable for what you're doing on the procedure. But I have Link as preferred, and if there's something that needs to be done for those specific use cases, I think we can go into it. But really based on what are we doing for IPS, what generally are the codes that should be used for reporting on diagnostic reports in general.
Do you want me to go to the Menti for what people have implemented around that for diagnostic report code?
Yeah, I think that'd be useful right now.
All right, let's do that. Let me just find the share screen button. Okie dokie. Okay. So here, that should be working for people. So in terms of coding, what have people got? Yes, including this time we included the field for I'm not an implementer. Oh, fascinating. No coding text only. Really? Is there anyone who's happy to talk to that? Because I am really interested about that.
That'd be radiology.
Yeah? Is it? I mean, just for the people who answered that, are you diagnostic imaging? If if you're comfortable sharing it, it's okay if you're not.
Um, so there we can do both.
Mm,
So for pathology as well,
yes,
but not just imaging.
that's true.
Like if we can't find a low code, then we fall back.
Okay, so sorry. No, what you're saying is that for some of the systems that you work with, your fallback is text.
Yeah, so, which is
Okay.
not an option.
Yeah, there's lots of unuseful codes sent sometimes on these reports, so you don't want to necessarily include them,
hmm
custom or other.
And Marvin?
Yeah, so one of the things that they're doing at SA Pathology is digitizing a whole bunch of paper reports, um, from the late 80s and the 90s. And rather than going and trying to convert those codes, that text to codes, they're just putting in text.
hmm All right, it looks like we've slowed down. Not everybody's responded, which is sad because we do have the I'm not an implementer option. So I feel like we have like a choice for everybody on the call. But I think we're quite stable now on the terminology choices.
So
Is
this,
there
just to
anything that
be
you wanted to
clear, sorry,
comment?
Daniel, this is
Sorry,
diagnosticreport.code we're
it
talking
is.
about. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
How
because
you
there's some of
code
the
in your
comments are
reports.
they're kind of conflating observation and result type codes. So this is about diagnosticreport.code.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. Sorry, that's a good point. So yeah, how are you coding and you only get one, it's a particular thing about fire that in the diagnostic report, there's one and only one code allowed for diagnosticreport.code. So when you're implementing that, or even when you're mapping that onto something that currently exists really in your system, what's the terminology that you're going to for that?
And in V2 world, that's mostly local codes.
I mean, don't out us as not being as interoperable as we could be, but yes. All right, I think we've got as many people who are going to respond as. Is there anything you wanted to say about this kind of selection, Corey? Is that matching what you thought it might be?
Yeah, I think this is similar to what I thought it might be. And yeah, I think SNOMEDs that we have a little bit more easily because they're on the orderable side as well. Yeah, yeah, I think we can go into discussion for it. But yeah, I think it's useful context for me. For next steps, I'm gonna send out after this meeting like the questions that I think are gonna be really tough, and I think that we hit on most of them out of here. One additional one that I'll add is at least talking about making sure I'm talking about the constraints for effective date and issue date time, because that one came up. I don't have that one in there currently. But yeah, I think there's a few different tough questions that are in here. And I don't know, Daniel, would the best way to maybe just be get like a Zulip poll about some of these tough questions or way to get responses before
All
the
right,
next
hey,
meeting?
let me think about that for a sec. But we've got Marvin.
Yeah.
Marvin could give me thinking time.
Oh, sorry, that my hand I think was still up from before. Apologies.
Oh, okay.
Does that give you enough
Okay.
thinking time?
So, okay, so I do know there's a question that you wanted to ask around status that we haven't quite got to yet, and we're over time. So we could include that in the next call, or you're right, we could put out a Zulip poll and see who's happy to respond to that around which status values they're implementing. Were there other questions that you were alluding to that you'd like to ask?
I think one or multiple profiles now is very top of
Mm-hmm.
mind for me.
Mm-hmm.
The coding system, I think we just got to, and then performer mandatory or must support. And we talked about identifier must support today. I think I'm going to keep it based on this discussion. I'm going to keep it on 0, but cardinality of 0 to as many as you want, but must support. And we can talk about that if it comes up during voting.
Before I respond, we'll just go to Heath.
Don't you have these questions about codes in your vendor support page? Like maybe rather than having another poll, just please go to that page and fill it out.
Pretty please. Yeah. Okay. That sounds good.
Or, I don't know. What do people want? Or would they? Like that's what the page is for, but no one's using it. So how do we get your feedback, guys?
Yeah.
Maybe to get better feedback, you should include people who use V2 currently because they're going to have similar requirements and you don't want to scare them off just because it's fire.
So in that case, Michael Osborne, can you provide emails to Corey? Like we've emailed out to everybody in the call list. That's 800 people. So if there are people we're missing, and there could be,
But are,
can
but are
you
you
provide that
suggesting?
advice?
But are you suggesting that Zulip might be less daunting for those people, Michael? Is that what you're alluding to?
Zula, no, not at all. I just think maybe we need to have a look at that Confluence page and sort of broaden the scope from Fire to V2 as well. Just so you know, if you were implementing Fire, what would you do?
Or maybe, sorry, okay, no, I see where you're going, and maybe flipping that question to say, if you are supporting diagnostic reporting in MV2, like what of these kind of status concepts map for you? That's what you're asking?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe we do send out a targeted email, Corey, that just rephrases it a bit.
Yeah, I think I can do that. It's honestly feedback that I've gotten from other places as well. So I think it's very reasonable. I think it's getting down to like which pieces of data do you support, not what FHIR elements do you support or what HL7v2 elements do you support, but it's like which pieces of data are required for you to exchange these, and are you expecting to exchange these?
All right, so let's work on that. We have the first kind of like, can we vote on something? And I reckon we can
Yep.
in our next AU call that is diagnostic report. So that's next Thursday. I think we're going to be actually bringing parts of this that seem to have broad support from this call and going, let's vote on it. And then there's another information session the following Friday to go into some of the more detailed parts that we haven't got to yet to kind of build that conversation. So I think those are our next steps.
I'm good. Email, bring the easy things up next call, bring the hard things up to the call after.
Pretty much.
Sounds
And
great.
I just want to say thank you very much, Corey, for presenting this. I really appreciate the time that you've taken around here. And thank you to everybody on the line for your time, for those who've contributed on the Confluence already or the Zulip poll and who have been here and like put forward your opinion. You know, that's really been fantastic. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.